I think about this demo a lot. If you've been following my channel for a long time now, you might remember my retrospective on the first 3 Halo games. And most importantly, for the sake of this video at least, you specifically remember the video on Halo 2. In that one, I talked about being a bambino and watching the E3 2003 demo of Halo 2 that was bundled with my copy of Combat Evolved, and my immense disappointment when I discovered that this had basically turned into 2 levels of this. I fucking love it when cars like speed by. It's really like cool. It's like super hot. They must have like a big dick. If you didn't know, the E3 demo of Halo 2, despite Sergeant Johnson's claims, was in fact smoke and mirrors. The development of Halo 2 was rough, and the demo was basically made at gunpoint to appease an outcry for more tangible content to be shown off. There's a great article on The Medium by Andrew G. that gathers quotes from Bungie staff and other publications from around that time that is well worth the read, because it gives a sense of what the atmosphere was back in 2003 and 2004 at Bungie, and some insight into the mad scramble they had to do just to get this one demo out. And despite all this effort and work to get this digital magic trick to fool audiences, the team basically had nothing. Joe Staten, the director of cinematics for the original Halo trilogy, said it the best.
We came back from E3 with actually less than what we wanted to. We came back from E3 with a demo. We did not come back from E3 with a playable part of a level. That was really bad, actually. That wasn't the goal.
In the article, this quote is paired with the lead 3D and effects artist Shin-Kai Wang's remark to really drive home how dire the situation was.
The hype from the trailer died down real quick and led to the monumental task that we had ahead of us. A story that we didn't understand, and gameplay features that we weren't 100% sure of.
To put it simply, shit was bad, and they basically had a year and a few months to cobble together a sequel to one of the most influential shooters of all time. And they did, with some casualties, the most notorious of which being the impressively abrupt ending. Now, I've come to love Halo 2 over the years, but it took a while for me to see what it was rather than what it could have been. It's human to wonder about the what-ifs in life. What if I did this instead of that? What if I said this instead of that? You know. But it's rare that you get a chance to really walk in the greener grass. It's rare, but it does happen. The original Resident Evil 2 is my favorite game, of all time. It's been pretty consistently at the very top of my 10 favorites game list, only occasionally trading places with stuff like Yakuza, like Dragon, and Illbleed. I've streamed it a trillion times too, most of the time sober, once drunk, and stoned a handful of times. And for years now, I've been following the progress of the restoration project of the found 40% build of Resident Evil 1.5. See, RE 1.5 has always been this really elusive, mysterious glimpse into, essentially, a parallel universe where RE2 was not the lovable B action horror romp featuring a twin cop and a biker that we know it today, but instead a B action horror romp featuring a twin cop and a biker that we don't know today. The vibes were more serious, the setting more stark, modern, and sterile, and on the whole, the game was just a lot more reserved. In many ways, RE 1.5 feels more like the original game, rather than the game it would become. Less bombast and flow, and more slow-paced and exploratory. It's interesting, but it ain't great. This is not a knock against the people who have worked for years to refine the largely incomplete skeleton that is this game, to something that almost borders on a tangible, realized product. These guys are doing a great job, and the fact that I can experience this game at all, and for free no less, you can just straight up download it right now, is amazing. And while the project still has a ways to go, and there are a couple of technical hiccups here and there, much of what Resident Evil 1.5 could have been is on display, warts and all. While I said Resident Evil 1.5 is interesting, that's only in the context of it being a near-complete, oddball version of a game that many know and love. Outside of that context, it's just kind of banal. Sure, the modern RPD from 1.5 is, certainly different and more realistic than the one that appears in the release game, but it sure isn't as fun or as memorable. Too often, people forget that real environments don't make for great game environments, even in horror games which primarily take place in more grounded environments, at least in comparison to many other games at that time, like Banjo-Kazooie, Tomb Raider, Panzer Dragoon, and Quake. It's a fine balancing act that games with these types of environments walk, where there is a sense of realism in the locations, but just enough gamey leeway to allow the experience of playing in those environments to actually be fun, or at the very least entertaining. And 1.5's environments certainly aren't that, and that's a big problem for a Resident Evil game, considering that classic RE environments are characters in and of themselves. They do a lot of the heavy lifting and help elevate what otherwise would be a relatively dull experience. I might get flack for this, but I've never cared for the combat in any of the classic RE games, or really 90% of all Golden Era survival horror games, because outside of Fatal Frame, Parasite Eve, and Kaldelka, combat is more of a means to an end. And Capcom knows this. The most fun you can have in the older Resident Evil games, in my opinion, is when you try to blow through them as fast as possible, trying to end combat as quickly as you can, or simply not engaging with it when you don't have to. The game incentivizes this, and reinforces it with item scarcity, and rewards you for efficiency at the end of the game. Resident Evil 1.5 has combat and unfun, bland, lifeless environments that look like something out of the Ring Terror's realm, and of course that isn't a good thing. So what you end up with is this middling survival horror game that isn't good now, and if I'm being honest, wouldn't have been good back then. Hideki Kamiya and co. probably knew this more than anyone, and so they scrapped it. But the what if of Resident Evil 1.5 remained and germinated in people's minds for over a decade, much like Halo 2's fake E3 demo did in mine. And this idealized vision of this phantom game gained a life of its own. But whatever people had dreamed it would always be more interesting than what it actually was. A failed project that got canned. When the 40% build was finally out of the hands of private collectors looking to make as much bank as possible, and into the hands of folks who really want to share it with the world, it surprisingly didn't surface immediately. Which is odd, but as author Richard Mandel stated in a pretty cool... As Richard... Jesus Christ. But as author Richard Mandel stated in a Eurogame article about the history of RE 1.5,
put yourself in their shoes. When they finally got their hands on that copy of the build, they quickly realized, to their horror, that what Capcom had been saying all along was right. It was a bad game. The legend had proven to be bigger than the product. There wasn't an intent to educate what was and wasn't worth releasing. At least not at first.
While some in Team I Got a Shotgun who procured the game wanted to release the 40% build as is, those who really spent the big bucks on it were clearly displeased, and preferred to hold off on a release and would, in the meantime, try to fix the game. That, of course, didn't go to plan, but I suggest reading the Eurogamer article if you want to know more about that. It's pretty interesting. But I think it's pretty obvious to see that beyond the what-if myth of Resident Evil 1.5, there was always this underlying dissatisfaction with it, both from the people who procured it to the people that made it. Yet I'm glad I did play 1.5, because while I might not have walked away with this amazing alternative Resident Evil 2 that I dreamed up when watching a few fuzzy video recordings of it on YouTube way back when, I did walk away with a bit of a new perspective on things. This little fantasy game of mine was made manifest, and it was... But experiencing it made me just love that fun, quirky, flawed B-action horror gem that I got even more. A lot of folks spend a lot of time thinking about how things could have been instead of what they are. And while it's fun to dabble in that occasionally, it can be a really destructive and negative way of viewing the world. Beyond just games and media, it's nice to take a step back and realize that, hey, things ain't perfect, but they're still pretty cool. It's good to be content with what you have, because when you live in dreams, always pondering the what-ifs, you fail to see the good stuff right in front of you.